Hi, I'm Carmel Crimmins in Dublin.
And I'm Sharon Reich Garson in New Jersey. Today, the U.S. economy loses 92,000 jobs in February.
President Donald Trump fires Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
Trump demands Iran's unconditional surrender.
And China rolls out its new 5-year plan at the National People's Congress. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes, 7 days a week.
The U.S. economy unexpectedly lost jobs in February, and the unemployment rate increased to 4.4%, possibly hinting at a cooling labor market. Economics editor Dan Burns is here to break down the latest jobs report.
So it was a real surprise. The 92,000 jobs lost last month was, frankly, larger than even the most pessimistic estimate in the Reuters poll of economists going into the number. The most downbeat estimate was about 9,000 among 72 economists, and the expectation on balance was for nearly 60,000 new jobs to have been created. So to have missed by that margin was really quite large and very unexpected.
Dan says that despite some factors like labor strikes and severe weather, the report calls into question the overall strength of the job market over the last year.
And if you go back to April of last year, when Trump famously had his Liberation Day tariffs announcements, there's been no job creation at all in the economy in that time. In fact, 19,000 jobs have been lost. Now, some of that is because of deliberate policy choices by Trump to target government employment. But if you look at just private sector employment for all of 2025 now, it was just under 300,000 for the year. And that was the weakest year for private sector employment outside of the pandemic since 2009.
These bleak numbers could put the Federal Reserve in a difficult spot as oil prices rise. But in an exclusive interview with Reuters, Trump brushed off concerns about spiking gas prices. If they rise, he said. And they're certainly doing that, heading for their largest weekly gains since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Trump is now calling for Iran's unconditional surrender. It's a dramatic escalation and comes just hours after Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said several countries have begun mediation efforts. The U.S. president writing on social media that, quote, there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. And he says the U.S. must have a say in choosing Iran's next leader. He made those comments just before Israel began pounding Beirut. Strikes have been carried out on more than 500 targets shortly after Israel ordered residents to leave the southern suburbs. An attack in the Dahia suburb focused on a command center that's used by Iran's Revolutionary Guards Navy unit, while others targeted command centers used by Hezbollah. Around 300,000 people have been displaced in the past 4 days in Lebanon, according to the Norwegian Refugee Council.
There was no let-up in Tehran's night skies either, the Israeli military saying it had started a broad-scale wave of strikes against the Iranian regime's infrastructure in the early hours of this morning. Meanwhile, Iran launched an overnight drone attack on the Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, the biggest US base in the Middle East. Missiles continued to rain down on Tel Aviv, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard said it had targeted air bases in Israel, Kuwait and Erbil, Iraq. In that exclusive interview, Trump said he doesn't think Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's son will succeed him as the Islamic Republic's new supreme leader, and he refused to rule out the son of the former Shah taking over. White House reporter Steve Holland spoke to Trump over the phone on Thursday.
The president has said he wants to have a role in selecting the next leader of Iran, and this is very similar to what happened in Venezuela. Trump picked or was involved in the selection of Delcy Rodriguez as the acting leader of Venezuela now. He's been able to get along well with her, so I think he'd like to see that replicated in Iran, which is a much more complicated situation. We don't yet know who's going to rise up and become the next leader of Iran. whether it might be someone from Khamenei's inner circle, some other like consensus candidate. It's just we're just nowhere near that at the moment. But he did rule out supporting the son of the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei as the leader. He didn't rule out the opposition figure Reza Pahlavi, who's related to the old Shah of Iran.
U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has been fired. Effective March 31st, President Trump says she'll be replaced by Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin. It's the biggest staffing shakeup of Trump's second term, and it raises questions about the direction of his immigration crackdown. Noem became one of Trump's most controversial cabinet members after 2 U.S. citizens were fatally shot by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. She quickly labelled them domestic terrorists before videos undercut that claim. But it was a pricey ad campaign that apparently pushed Trump over the edge. Here's Steve Holland again, who spoke to the president about Noem shortly before the announcement.
One of the things that seems to have gotten the president's attention in a negative way is that Kristi Noem testified on Capitol Hill about a $200 million ad campaign that she's featured in. And she faced questions from lawmakers about this ad. She was asked, did President Trump sign off on this ad and this expenditure? And she said, yes, he did. And so when I got the president on the phone, I said, did you sign off on this ad? And he said, no, I did not. I never knew anything about it. So that would seem to be a one indicator of why he decided to move on. And the other is this expensive plane that that was being set up for her to fly around in kind of a VIP type plane situation. You know, he gets tired of those kind of headlines. So, and then plus, remember, she was immersed in the ICE crackdown in Minneapolis and the resulting deaths of those 2 demonstrators, and that turned the public against her strongly, and he had to replace her with Tom Homan, the border czar. So that was a factor in his decision making.
China has a new 5-year plan: turbocharge its tech and settle for a slightly lower growth target of 4.5 to 5%. Beijing is trading its record-breaking GDP to focus on AI, robotics, and high-tech self-reliance. Kevin Krolicki in Beijing has more.
The really interesting thing about the government work report and the 5-year plan is the laser focus on achieving self-sufficiency and high technology. That's the aspiration, and really driving AI into every sector of the economy. The government called out a number of sectors for government support. Some of these are sectors that China already dominates or has a lead in, like humanoid robotics. Some of them are very cutting edge, still, almost science fiction, like machine-brain interfaces. But one thing throughout this planning process that China is clear on is it wants to get AI and embedded AI into 90% of the industrial sectors by 2030. It's both creating demand for local champions like DeepSeek, and it's potentially creating a risk for employment that the government will have to manage down the road.
US military investigators say that America was likely responsible for the strike on the Iranian girls' school last weekend. 2 US officials told Reuters it isn't a final determination and the investigation is still underway. Britney Spears has been arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence. California Highway Patrol says they received a report of a black BMW travelling erratically at high speed. She was the only person in the car and showed signs of impairment due to both alcohol and drugs, according to the police. She was booked into the Ventura County main jail late Wednesday. A representative for Spears did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Ukraine and Russia exchanged 200 prisoners of war each on Thursday, even as US-backed peace talks remain stalled. Video from the Ukrainian Presidential Press Service shows a bus arriving at an undisclosed location in Ukraine. As the doors open, tearful relatives push forward, greeting freed soldiers, many of them draped in Ukrainian flags. For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player. If you're listening on a smart speaker, just ask for the latest news from Reuters 7 days a week. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.